Well, hello, everybody. Good to see everyone and celebrating the new members for joining us. My name is Hannah Jo, and tonight I'm seated with Dr. Adam Klein. Thank you for coming to the District House.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be back in Santa Barbara, actually.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I want to take some time and really unpack the title of tonight's District House because it's juicy. It kind of has some layers, and it definitely piqued my curiosity. So I want to hear it from you. Tell us more the context that feels most important.
So, being with serendipity, and the serendipity of it really speaks to how I felt like throughout my life, I was really in the right place at the right time, the right set of skills in order to become a psychedelic neuroscientist, as I describe myself. Where now I work for a pharmaceutical company. It's a small startup that is working on drugs that affect serotonin, as well as other targets. What we're trying to do is take psychedelic drugs and bring them into the current mental health treatment system by getting novel compounds FDA-approved for the treatment of mental illness. And so I think that's how this title really exemplifies my journey and not the path that I took to get here.
Yeah. It's interesting hearing you say what you just said about being in the right place, the right time. And I have a little glimpse into your personal background. And so knowing what I know about you, early adulthood when you were at university, and hearing you say what you said, I make the meaning that you have become a spiritual person through this development. And I'm wondering if you're tracking what I was saying in regards to your experience, Colombia and beyond.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say it was spiritual necessarily, but I think my experiences with psychedelics personally and now professionally have definitely led you in that direction. Mm-hmm. And so, as a little bit of background, I first became interested in psychedelics back when I took mushrooms when I was 14 years old, still in high school, and just had this revelation of how can a small molecule like psilocybin or psilocin go into the brain and cause such profound effects on consciousness, changing everything about how our brain works, how we process our sensory information and emotions, cognition, and that really set me on a lifelong learning quest to understand how a molecule like that can go to the brain, use such profound effects. And all throughout high school, I found myself procrastinating my homework by going online, reading about psychedelic drugs and their psychoactives, how they work in the brain, and receptors, pharmacology. And really, when I got to college, I was presented with the opportunity to join the neuroscience major, which was the combination of psychology and biology, which were two of my favorite classes. And I had this thought that maybe I'd take my passion, my hobby of reading about psychedelic drugs, and turn it into a career. And that's what led me to pursue neuroscience on psychedelics. And wasn't always a straight out forward, and that while I was studying during my undergraduate degree at Columbia University, I got arrested for selling LSD to an undercover officer. Yep, that was a bad day. And it was also a slow news day, so they paraded us out in front of the media, and I was on the cover of New York Times, CNN, and he called it Operation Ivy League to paint us as a drug man. Like, even when I was sitting in the back of the police van, thinking how my worst fears of a SWAT team kicking down my door at 6 a.m. had finally come true, it was really a very free experience. And I had that moment where I thought, how can I use this as a stepping stone to achieve my goals? How can I go from handcuffed in a police van to a psychedelic neuroscientist? So that's the story that I'd like to tell you about tonight, as well as what I'm doing now and how the field's progressing. And yeah.
Yeah. I feel curious, like when you were the high school student exploring mushrooms and like starting to pursue college, what the response was from your family and friends around your psychedelic interests.
It was always incredibly taboo to say that I wanted to go into neuroscience to study psychedelics, because at the time, that was a taboo field even within neuroscience itself. And there were very few labs that were actively researching psychedelics. So instead, I went and studied the serotonin system as it relates to drug abuse more broadly. And that was part of the work I did during my PhD here at UC Santa Barbara, working in the lab of Aaron Ettenberg, studying serotonin as it relates to motivation to seek cocaine. And so both psychedelics and desire to understand them is always the driving force. I understood that that wasn't necessarily a road to becoming a neuroscientist at that time. So I did what I could, got as close as possible by still studying drugs, still studying the serotonin system, knowing that that would be the stepping stone to eventually get into psychedelic research.
Yeah, let's dive into the serotonin system a little bit more. If you want to give like a basic description for those who are not familiar, and then sort of bridge how that relates to the research you're in currently.
Mm-hmm. So serotonin is one of the main neurotransmitters throughout the brain, and it's known as a neuromodulator, meaning it's not really used so much for point-to-point communication between neurons, but rather for wide distributed signaling, getting large parts of the brain to sync up and fire together at one time. So the way that that relates is psychedelic drugs work primarily through their action at the serotonin receptors, specifically the serotonin 2A receptor. But they also do a number of other ones, which may or may not be involved in different parts of the effects of psychedelics. So it's through our understanding of the biology of the serotonin system that we are hoping to develop psychedelic drugs as treatments for depression. And there's already been a long link between serotonin and depression through drugs like the SSRIs or stuff to serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And even long before that were the monoamine oxidase inhibitors, which increase levels of dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin throughout the brain. So the link between psychedelics, serotonin, and mental health seems like a pretty fruitful avenue.
Yeah, so what does your research look like currently?
So currently at Gilgamesh, we are involved with a number of different programs. The two most advanced are, you have a short-acting psychedelic with a duration of about 1 to 2 hours that was in clinical trials for major depressive disorder. So this is something that came about with the idea of, well, we know psilocybin is going to work. We fully believe it works, and we don't know why it works, but we know that it does. There's a possibility that something like DMT, which is a very short-acting psychedelic, might not leave you enough time in that space to really do any significant processing. So if we can have something of an intermediate duration that allows kind of power to sing as, say, ketamine or Spravato, now you can take psilocybin and that potential treatment and scale it up to more people. Rather than a 6-hour drug, you have a 2-hour drug. Now instead of one patient per therapist per day, all of a sudden that same therapist can deliver 2, 4, 6 patients per day. So that's our most advanced compound that just completed phase 2A clinical trials, which for those who don't know is the second phase is when we start testing in patients rather than just healthy volunteers. And you saw it take very significant improvement in depression scores as well as remission in a significant number of subjects.
And with this short-acting psychedelic, is there a molecule or plant medicine that it's like based off of or similar to in any way?
It's most structurally similar to either psilocin or DMT. It's that tryptamine phenol.
Okay. It's interesting to hear that because I don't personally have like I don't hold those two as like similar in my personal experience, but to understand that they're similar structurally is interesting.
They're very similar structurally, and in terms of their pharmacology, really the primary area where they difference is the rate of metabolism, where DMT is broken down by your body so quickly that it's necessarily only going to produce a short experience unless you take it in the form of ayahuasca, which has other drugs in it to inhibit the enzymes that break down DMT. Whereas something like psilocybin, it takes your body much longer to actually break it down, producing that extended experience.
So can you share about the trial studies, like with these patients with the therapist? What is the dosage range? Are they in a state where they have their sense of self and they're chatting with the therapist and being guided through an inquiry process, or what does that involve?
No, so we're using minimal therapy with the psychedelic. It's called supportive care, where really they just have someone who's sitting there to be a calm presence and reassure them, but they're not doing any active psychotherapy in these trials.
And the dosage is of a range where they're like coherent and eyes open, or it looks different for everyone.
It's a very psychedelic dose. So this isn't a microdose type study. It would be the equivalent, say, 2 to 3 grams of mushrooms.
For 1 to 2 hours. Yeah, very interesting. That's so cool. And so can you describe a little bit more about what your direct role is in the development of that?
Right. So I'm a preclinical scientist by training, behavioral pharmacologist. So that means my specialty is in studying animals' behavior and how drugs change animals' behavior in order to predict either how it's going to work in humans or to understand some mechanism about what these drugs are doing, either at the receptor or in stressed animals, or whether it's going to be strongly psychedelic, the duration, etc. So at the company, I'm primarily responsible for conducting and overseeing all of the preclinical animal work related to pharmacology.
So forgive me if this is a naive question, but when I hear you talk about using these treatments for mental health, and perhaps this is separate than the animal testing, but I wonder, like, can they be treated in this way for things like human depression? And how does that work?
That's a great question. And that's also an area of active debate all the time about whether these models are valid, how valid they are, what we can learn from them. But the way we like to use them is for answering very specific questions. For example, one of the things we use is a chronic mild stress model. This seems to replicate many of the same features seen in human depression, where the rats would be anhedonic, as in they don't feel as much pleasure from things that are normally pleasurable. That we measure through sucrose intake. You need to drink a sweet solution. We also look at changes in a cognitive task. Well, they can recognize a novel object that's been placed in their cage, and their anxiety. So how fearful are they of a novel, elevated, open space where they could be at risk of getting hit or bit by a predator? So by using these, the stress to get these animals, which produces a phenotype that looks very similar to certain phenotypes we see in human depression. Then we can come in with our novel compound or a known psychedelic like ketamine or psilocybin and see how it affects the rat's behavior on a number of these different tasks to see whether this is potentially going to be a interesting treatment and worthy of bringing forward.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you for clarifying. That makes more sense to me now. I share this because a friend of mine was doing research on a molecule that we enjoy, and he was very afraid of it being neurotoxic. But when he actually started to go into the research and do the math on the dosage that they were using in the animal testing, it was like hundreds of times the amount that he would have used for a social or recreational dose of this molecule.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things you have to be careful reading the scientific literature sometimes is understanding what types of questions are they asking. In those studies really looking at massive doses, that may not be particularly relevant to something like a social interaction task or doses that are used in humans. And so you may see toxic effects. And with any drug, when you push the dose high enough, you will see some toxic effects.
And what defines toxic effects?
That's a question for a toxicologist. 'Cause generally, we're looking for things that are irreversible. Any cell death, one of the issues for, say, ketamine-like compounds is a phenomenon called only lesions, which is a necrosis seen in the brain of rats. And it happens with all known NMDA antagonists, so anything in that family, but it seems to happen depending on how large of a dose they get and how often they're dosed. So we want to look at those effects and know that this is a possibility for our molecules to produce similar effects. And that's part of going back and forth with the FDA, showing that, yes, this is a possible outcome, but no human is ever going to be exposed to amounts that are 100-fold below this level for this amount of time. So it's not actually a risk in a human population.
So in reference to the trial you were describing with the short-acting psychedelic, if things move forward in the direction you maybe feel personally invested in, what would that look like?
What do you mean by that?
Like if the trial were to move forward with high success rates and that molecule or analog, I'm not sure the proper name for it, then what is its process in becoming more available for treatment?
Well, let's we go through the next stage, which will be finding the optimal dose range. Then move on to phase 3 of clinical trials, which is testing it in a much broader patient set, multiple sites across multiple different countries, and showing that the effects that we've seen in our early small trials will replicate to the broader population. Once it completes that stage, then we go back and forth at the FDA for review, and keep our fingers crossed.
And when you're seeking to find the lowest optimal dosage, does that just involve dosing low and a little bit higher until there's reported effect?
So that is what we did in our initial phase 1 studies, where we slowly increased the dose to figure out where the most likely dose range that's going to be therapeutic would be based on how psychedelic it was, how strong of a trip it was. Now we want to go back in patients with depression and find out how strong of a trip do they need.
How is that determined?
Through careful clinical trials. Do they need one set of subjects, one dose, and another set, different dose, and compare between them?
Okay. It's so interesting. You're definitely putting language to things that I think are challenging to quantify, like how trippy an experience is.
Yeah. That is a challenge that we debate back and forth all the time, is how do we really measure this? Yeah. We have certain scales, and these scales are measuring some aspect of the psychedelic experience, but they may not fully capture. I don't believe they do fully capture full extent what the psychedelic experience can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have another personal curiosity about the other people that are involved in this type of research project. Do they also have a personal history of psychedelic awakening? Is that common for people in this field?
It's not uncommon. I think for a long time, there's a lot of people in the field who may have had an interest in psychedelics, but would have been afraid to admit it. And may then have come out of the psychedelic closet, so to speak. But there's also another younger generation coming up like me who were not afraid to talk about our experiences. I think back to a conference I went to a couple of years ago, one of the Society for Neuroscience conferences, and I was chatting with an individualized paper about a novel or semi-novel psychedelic substance called before hydroxy DIPT. And he mentioned how it was about as strong as psilocybin. I said, no, it isn't. He said, what do you mean? I was like, I've taken it. I can tell you it's much weaker than psilocybin. And he just had his mind blown that someone would come up to him and say that. Then at another conference just a couple weeks ago, I met the same person again, heard him retell that same story from his perspective of someone came up and told him he's not itching the drug. So I do think that is also very important for scientists to sort of break that taboo and talk about our own personal experiences with these substances. But at the same time, there's still the pharma old guard who have never and will never try these substances.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate, on a personal note, you bridging those realms. And I think that it is important for, everyone to come to their own personal, realization of the potency of these molecules and choose to explore them if they wish to. But I've heard you say a couple times that there's challenges here, like how to quantify how trippy the experience is, or how to be confrontational to folks when they're saying one thing that's not actually true. What are some of the other challenges that you're facing either within this particular research moment or beyond?
There's so many different challenges, from highly technical things like getting a compound to properly dissolve in saline when one vendor is able to do it and another vendor isn't, to challenges like working with the FDA to build a plan for getting some of these compounds across the finish line. Challenges working with the federal government. We have a $14 million grant from NIDA for one of our programs to develop an analog of ibogaine for opioid use disorder. You have an analog that seems to be much less cardiotoxic than ibogaine itself, while still providing, at least preclinically, the same anti-addictive properties.
And from my understanding, an analog is the compound that is being created through psychedelic pharmacology to replicate to some degree this natural.
Right. So an analog, when I say that, I mean something that's similar to a known compound. So an analog to ibogaine would be structurally and pharmacologically similar to ibogaine, but with a unique chemical structure. And that unique chemical structure makes it a novel compound, which also allows us to have IP protection on it.
Interesting. When I was first being exposed to this sort of thing, I felt very judgmental or a little weirded out about this realm of research, specifically the replication of natural things like bufo or ibogaine. And now, as I'm learning more about it and understanding, I actually see it as a necessity for the progression of our psychedelic future and people having more access to these healing modalities. So I'm really glad to know that this is all happening, and I really trust the process, even though sometimes I imagine it feels like things take a lot of time and effort.
Yeah. And that is a good point that you brought up, the difference between the natural plant medicine type psychedelics, and I hate using that word so much, plant medicine, because there's nothing inherently special about the fact that it came from a plant. The substance is the same. Ibogaine is ibogaine, whether it was from the bark of a tree or whether you made it synthetically. The same is true of 5-methoxy-DMT, whether synthetic or from toad. And so for just conservation, preserving the species, it's important to have an alternative route to get at the psychedelics. And then on top of that are the analogs, which are inspired by these compounds, but are structured different, never kind of nature.
So when you say that you don't like the term plant medicine, are you suggesting that there is analog medicine or compound medicine?
I'm suggesting that it's just medicine. And one of the issues I personally take with the term plant medicine particularly as it's being applied in some of these legislative actions to legalize psychedelics, is they are neglecting other plant medicines like the opium poppy, where we get morphine and heroin. That is a plant medicine. Or the cocoa tree, or we get cocaine, also an important plant medicine. It seems like at least on the legislative side, a lot of it's truly directed towards plant-based psychedelic medicines. And if they were truly wanting to allow for confined medicine, then it shouldn't be restricted.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I would agree.
A friend of mine once described it as a pharmacochauvinism.
What?
Pharmacochauvinism. Yeah, my drugs are better than your drugs.
Oh, no. Well, I'm excited about your drugs, personally.
You too.
At first, I was going to say your drugs are the best, but I didn't want to, see too soon.
Yeah, I think there's space for all of these compounds. Just because we're developing an analog of psilocybin, that doesn't get rid of psilocybin from the world. The mushrooms are still going to be popping up everywhere. It's going to make them, they're going to be very easy to grow. It's just going to be one more tool in the toolkit.
Yeah, let's go into some more of the benefits of this, compound and analog medicine becoming available. Not only is it going to diminish people's access to what they already have access to, but it's only going to add. Yeah.
Yeah, and when psychedelic medicine, I love how I could say when psychedelic medicine becomes a thing, not if anymore. But when it does, it likely won't be able to scale very fast at all. Particularly if you're working with compounds like psilocybin or LSD, because they last so long and are going to be delivered with therapy both preceding the trip, during the trip, and then for integration after the trip. That's a lot of psychotherapy commitment. And so that's where our molecule fits in of ensuring down the duration of the trip, treat more people faster, get to a broader set of patients. And so another issue is the cost. And a lot of that cost is going to be driven by that whole network of therapy that's being provided along with it.
I see that. And a moment ago, you were naming the Ibogaine project and some other funding that you're receiving. Are there other projects that are active or upcoming that you're wanting to describe?
So we also have a project for an NMDA antagonist. So that's a ketamine-like compound, with the idea being that ketamine is the first psychedelic drug that's been approved for mental health. Johnson & Johnson informs Spravato as a nasal spray. And one of the things that we wanted to improve upon from ketamine is make it a compound that's orally bioavailable, so it'd be taken as a pill, and hopefully a compound that can provide some of the antidepressant benefits, but with fewer of the side effects like dissociation and sedation. Aided to have something that can be taken on a similar regimen to ketamine, as maybe once a week, twice a week, but as a pill in the comfort of your own home, rather than having to go into a psychiatrist's office or a ketamine clinic to get the therapy.
Would that also be a shorter duration experience?
No, that one's going to be a little bit longer, but we're hoping because it's a less psychoactive experience, it'll still be amenable to at-home dosing.
Mm-hmm. And what are the qualities of something being psychoactive?
Well, psychoactive as in changing things about how the brain works, thoughts, cognition, perception, and at least for Johnson & Johnson and their Spravato formulation of ketamine, it seemed like it was the sedation and dissociation that was really what prevents people from taking it home. So if we have something that isn't going to cause those effects, or fewer of those effects at the intended dose, then we're hoping for more broad access that way.
Yeah. And I imagine you have a lot of insight on ketamine and its like psychiatric development and research. And what were your feelings towards it being the first psychedelic medicine for mental health treatment?
Not really surprised because ketamine has long been used in the medical field. So it's something that a lot of practitioners are already very familiar with, either primarily as a anesthetic, used very often in emergency medicine for that reason. So ketamine is not something unfamiliar to the medical community. So I guess I'm really not surprised that was the first one to cross the finish line. Also because it is it's a shorter experience. It's more controllable, can be and has to be done in a physician's office. So yeah, I think it fits better into the medical system as it stands than something like MDMA or psilocybin does.
Yeah, I'm partially asking this because with my background of primarily being exposed to recreational use of ketamine, I was highly surprised and confused when I started to hear it being used for like therapeutic treatment, because my association was witnessing people that were not looking therapized.
Therefore.
And so when I hear things like the MDMA analog or psilocybin analog, like all of that feels more resonant just to me and my personal experiments of therapeutic treatment. So that's why I asked the question. I was curious if you had any like split feelings or.
Well, I have also done a lot of volunteering at music festivals, doing harm reduction and working with medical teams there. So I have seen my fair share of people with ketamine that do not look in a very therapeutic state. I think with something like that, it really is all about the dose and with the exposure. Getting it, the infusion of ketamine through an IV bag at a controlled rate is very different than just storing grand batches of white powder to the point where you can't stand up anymore. So, and even it's with the preclinical, the animal studies you've done, you see that if you push the dose of ketamine too high, it loses its best effects. So I think something like that, it is all about the dose and timing.
Yeah, totally. And I don't totally understand how your research world works. So twist my question as needed. But when I think about being you, I feel very insightful and very enthusiastic about the possibility for change. And so I wonder if you ever have from within yourself, like research inspirations that you then have the bandwidth to actually explore. Like, is the work that you're doing ever yours, or is there ideas within you that you desire to research in the future?
Yeah, I think this is really the direction where I feel my research has the most impact, being able to take my knowledge of the vast array of psychedelic compounds and really work through what are the best properties to bring one of these into wings for medicine.
And I do see that you are passionate about supporting like recreational users of psychedelics with what you shared about the harm reduction work that you do. Do you want to tell us more about what that involves and looks like, your contribution?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with a number of different organizations that do psychedelic harm reduction, primarily at music festivals. I work with a group called RGX Medical that sets up the medical booth, a number of big West Coast festivals, and provides integrated sanctuary space, which is psychedelic peer-to-peer support, very similar to what the Zendo project does. If anyone's familiar with Zendo, where essentially just someone to sit with and talk to while you're going through very difficult, intense psychedelic, or not psychedelic, but any intense experience. On top of that, I also volunteer with a group called DanceSafe, which also works at music festivals, but providing drug education and drug checking services where people can bring in samples of drugs that they may or may not intend to take. And DanceSafe will help them check those drugs to make sure that they are what they think they are and weren't sold something else or have any harmful contaminants in drugs.
And my understanding of the Zendo project is that if someone is distressed in that festival environment, rather than bringing them to the like formal medical treatment of that environment, they can go to Zendo or to...
It depends on what state the person's in. If they don't need any medical support, then they would go to Zendo. Sometimes someone in an emotional crisis is also having a physical crisis manifest at the same time. And there we'd have them in the medical tent and bring the Zendo sitters along so that they can still receive that support even while they're being more actively monitored.
So when you're offering that, you're sitting with people during their experience.
Yeah.
And what degree of involvement are you providing? I'm just personally curious.
It really depends on the situation. It could be anything from someone who just needs someone to sit there with them silently and listen, to someone who can reflect back at them, or sometimes just sitting with someone while they're experiencing thought loops and just riding those waves out with them, helping to ground them, those moments of lucidity whenever you can, and trying to provide a safe, supportive environment for them to go through whatever it is that they're going through. It's really, our goal is to make sure people don't end up in an ambulance or a squad car.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you for your contribution to that. I imagine that is a big, like, time and energetic investment for you sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I love hearing from you, like, the resonance of wanting to support people and having a safe experience. And let's tune in a little bit more to what you want to see in the future of psychedelics. I understand the therapeutic approach with the compounds that are being created is a part of that. But is there anything else that you really hope to see?
Yeah, I really hope to see psychedelics integrated into more aspects of society beyond just the therapeutic. I think these tools have value both as medicines, as tools for spiritual enlightenment, for religious practices, or even just for recreation. I think those are all legitimate uses of psychedelics. And I think bringing them more into the mainstream society, showing how psychedelics have helped inspire, create art, medicine, and everything in between really is where I'd love to see society go. And I think over the last 3 to 5 years, it's really started moving in that direction. So I'm quite optimistic for the psychedelic future.
Wonderful. Yeah. I feel curious if you can share any story that comes to heart around what you've seen in your research, anything that's been particularly interesting or shocking to you and your peers?
I feel it's all so technical that I don't know how to translate it to a broader audience, but one thing that I was, I don't know if it's a shock, but surprised by was after I finished my postdoc and moved on to Gilgamesh, a couple of years later, I found I was sent a publication that was being submitted with my name on it that had a lot of the work I did for my postdoc, where it turns out that what that work is going towards was understanding the signaling mechanisms responsible for psychedelic activity in the brain, and really answering the question of, we know it's the 5-HT2A receptor, but then what comes next after that to cause psychedelic-like effects. So in this paper, we were able to describe that, and it was a little bit of a shock to see that all of my work for my postdoc, that some of which I didn't know what I was doing at the time, I thought I was just testing compounds, and seeing the whole story come together was surprising and quite gratifying too.
Serendipitics, if you will. Yeah. I want to check back in on your presentation title to see if there's more to expand on around the startups piece. I know you've mentioned the Gilgamesh, but do you want to tell us more about them?
Yeah, I guess I could tell you a little more about Gilgamesh. So I joined Gilgamesh actually as the first employee after the founders. Part of also the serendipity was, while I was doing my postdoc, I was on a training fellowship there and the funding ran out. So I had to go find a job. And at the time I knew I absolutely still wanted to work in the field of psychedelic research. So I looked into all the companies that were working there. And at the time, Gilgamesh was the one that really stood out to me because they were working on novel compounds, whereas everyone else had some proprietary form of psilocybin or MDMA or LSD. And that was sort of a turn off for two reasons. One, because I don't think all these companies are going to succeed. Maybe one will be able to patent a natural product and get some IP out of it. But two, as a scientist, that's much less interesting than a whole breadth of novel compounds that are out there. So I joined a team in late 2020, and as employee number 1, and now 5 years later, we have 2 compounds in phase 2 clinical trials and more things that are coming down through the pipeline. So it's been incredibly exciting to watch the company really grow up around me for me. Where now the compounds that are in clinical trials were once just ideas fish on napkin.
I have like a question that you may not have an answer to, but I'm like humoring myself at the thought of it. Because when we think about compounds, like we reference them in what they are, like MDMA. And when I hear you talk about these compounds in trial, I'm like coming up with like these different names because they're like kind of secretive and novel. Do you guys have any like nicknames for these compounds that you can share with us?
I have to share the numbers with you. The compounds, at least the ones that are in clinical trials, have gotten their generic names already, but due to the 2 different licensing bodies that were approved by one, the other one we're still waiting on, I don't think I'm actually allowed to use those names yet. But one is bredesolocin, as in short psilocin. That's our short-acting psychedelic compound.
I'm going to call that one Shorty.
Heel down. And the ketamine analog is blitzoprolol, I believe. Vlix. Which I think is to inspire feelings of peacefulness.
I like Blitz too. Yeah.
That should be a short one, right?
Cool. Well, thank you, Ada, for sharing all that you shared. I want to just give a little nudge to the audience to be with your curiosities and any questions that have surfaced in the time that we've been chatting. Because in a moment, we're going to pass around the mic for any questions that want to be asked directly. But first, I want to ask you, is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we turn to Q&A?
Yeah, I think we really covered quite a bit. Yeah.
Well, we are going to bring people with questions the mic directly because we have an online audience that wants to hear your questions too. So here you are.
How do you quantify the therapeutic value of these different substances? I believe you mentioned it when you were talking about the rat model, depression, and releasing some kind of substance. And I guess with that, I'm wondering, with those metrics, are you making sure that you're not missing any amazing compounds that you're creating, as you're testing them on rats or something? How do you know that you're testing the right metrics, and out of all the different substances you're making, you're finding all the magical ones?
We really don't now, unfortunately. And it's likely that many compounds have been made and missed because they were killed for some other reason. Is the process of drug design and drug development involves really optimizing so many different things about the molecule that it can be killed off for small reasons that, like, say, its metabolism. Maybe it doesn't get metabolized well in rats, and so it would be something that we could develop in rats, and it's killed for being too difficult. Or 5-HT2B is another reason, which is a receptor that's expressed in the heart that a lot of psychedelics target. And activation of this receptor could cause valvulopathies, where the valves grow too much. And so something that may be a fantastic antidepressant has a little bit too much 2B activity for our liking, so we throw it away.
And how do you imagine us eventually getting to the point where we're studying really long-acting substances like ibogaine and mescaline and things like that? Do you have to first have a short-acting substance and then scale things up to the point where it becomes economical to work at those?
I don't know if it will become economical to work with those, unfortunately. If there's a shorter acting alternative available, no one's going to sit through a 12-hour trip if they could get the same benefit with 6 or 4 or 2. Something like ibogaine is a little bit different because that would be used for very different indication, but there is no other alternative. But if we can make a 2-hour ibogaine analog that worked just as well, I'm sure we'd be working on that too. So, but I think maybe for more academic studies, comparing LSD versus mescaline versus psilocybin on different domains, you might see some of that done. But even for those academic labs, it's very difficult to have patients where you have to watch them for 12 plus hours. All of a sudden it's an overnight thing.
And my last question is, if you discover something that ends up being wildly popular, have you ever considered the personal implications of just changing the world, having that personal impact?
Yeah, that is definitely something I considered. And it's really so special that I could be a part of the psychedelic revolution and contribute so much to it. Right? I really feel like I'm in serendipity of just being in that right place to make that impact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, enjoyed your talk. I'm curious about selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and psilocybin, how they, what do you think is the role for SSRIs going forward? Do you feel like this new approach, you said it can maybe really eliminate major depression? And I mean, that could be really a threat to the pharmaceutical industry because people are on SSRIs for a very long time, typically a minimum of 2 years. And when you think about that, but also how does it interact with the receptor differently, to get the different kind of result? Because I actually don't think SSRIs actually cure depression. Is that your understanding?
Well, SSRIs are very effective for some people and very ineffective for other people. And that is really the place where we are now, is there's a lot of people who will tell you that their lives have been saved by SSRIs. And there's even more will tell you that they're garbage and they ruin their sex drive. So really what we're hoping to have is just another tool, another option for the people who SSRIs don't work. Maybe psilocybin or maybe ketamine or some other molecule. But just having a different approach to treat depression rather than the classic SSRI model is really just going to expand treatment to people who either would not have been helped by SSRIs, or maybe people who are kind of managing on SSRIs, but now we help even more.
Would they have to clear the SSRI from their system before they would use what you're proposing?
That is an active area of research, and seems like the answer is no, you do not have to. That the SSRIs may slightly blunt the effect of the psychedelics, but that blunting is primarily in areas such as anxiety. So it may actually help.
Thank you. That was my question.
It's brand new research out of the Thias Lichty's lab in Switzerland. I was just at a neuroscience conference a couple of weeks ago. And that was exactly one of the questions they were looking at.
And just one more question. What do you use for your control if it has such distortion? Do you do randomized studies? Do you use a control?
In the clinical trials?
Yes.
Yes. We use a very low dose of our same compound. Enough for it to be noticeable, but not a full experience.
So I have a confession. I came because tonight because I emailed a broker that's able to get privately held stock sometimes, and I said, I'd like to buy stock in this Gilgamesh. And then I just checked my phone, and 3 hours ago, AbbVie announced they're in talks to buy the company for $1 billion. Did you hear that?
I can't comment on that.
Oh?
Did hear.
So that's great. I guess it's very expensive to do a phase 3 trial. So now it sounds like you got all the money you need. So congratulations. As number one employee, I hope you got some stock options. So now my question is, who's your closest competitor? What other companies are going to, be able to complete a phase 3 trial and you think are best poised for success?
I think Beckley has a pretty good shot with their vitamin DMT formulation. Cybin has some good things in the work. MindNet as well is still to chug along with their LSD. What if you're going for different indication, you're trying diabetes instead. So there are definitely still a number of competitors out there in space.
Thank you for the layup. Kind of works into my questions, and I think hopefully I'll try to bring it home. But so I read 2 books that you're talking. Everything we talked about really made me think about what was called Quick Fixes by Ben Fong. He's from Arizona, and he studies addiction, and the whole book was about how like pretty much everything that becomes a drug started as something natural or something people did, or, and then, pharmaceutical industry said, we're going to take this, study it and clean it up. And, you're giving everyone methamphetamines in the 50s and stuff. And, just how there's like a pipeline to drugs that come in. And the other book that I read was called, The Kids These Days. And it's a guy named Malcolm Harris. And he basically wrote about how like the system's kind of optimizing for, people to go into the workforce and like be able to contribute. So, so they're prescribing ADHD medication to young children, and they're, the huge uptick in SSRIs, and they're really like optimizing for what's the word I'm looking for? For like keeping people like, happy and working healthy. And they chart like suicide rates, they chart like, can people contribute to society? And I'm not speaking like personally, and this is just kind of like what it came up. So as I see the writing on the wall to me with psychedelic research is like, here is the next thing that the system, society, what have you, governments, just all of us, you could say democracy here, hopefully. And, here's this new tool to help people deal with the modern world, right? And I mean, if which she had said is true, clearly this is the bet, right? That we're gonna have these new things that are coming to help a lot of people. But do you personally think that we are? Is this a Band-Aid, or is this is this something that can maybe jump the rails, so to speak, and like send us in a different direction, whereas like something like a Adderall or SSRIs might just like make a complacent but functional society, whereas psychedelics might give us something else. So I guess I'll leave it to you to answer how you want.
Yeah, I do think there is the possibility that psychedelics can provide something else, something that's beyond that system and outside of it, or even that they will break the system in certain ways, because psychedelics there's an element of chaos in psychedelic trips, and I don't think that's something that's going to be removed once psychedelics make it into mainstream medicine. There is certainly that element, the trickster that's at play with psychedelics who work sometimes, where I like to tell people that you're never going to have the psychedelic trip that you want to have, but you'll have the trip that you needed to have. I think that kind of speaks to, no matter what your intentions are going into it, what the drug does, it's going to do, and you have to be along for the ride.
Here's the unforeseen consequences. There you just surrender.
From an anthropological point of view, do you believe we are becoming more tribal and that is the direction we need to go?
Well, I feel like that gets a little more into the political side, but unfortunately, yeah, it does seem like society is getting more tribal, but I don't think that is the correct direction.
Explain based on our ancestors and psychedelics.
What do you mean?
Well, if you look at a lot of tribes in the past, this was all honored medicine, ritual quests and things of that sort were mind expanding contributions that were brought into the tribal communities.
I was thinking of tribalism as more the divide among people, where it seems like nowadays in our politics and our society, people are...
No, I meant it as coalescing, not divide.
But I think psychedelics can be very powerful for building community and building a tribe in that sense, because they help to really dissolve barriers between people, giving it a ritualistic setting like that, where it makes you feel much more attuned with the community and the group. We're all participating in the ceremony. So from that perspective, then, yeah, I do think psychedelics can be a good way to help get people to reconnect to their friends, their loved ones, in their communities.
So a healing perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
1 second. It's my understanding that opium and cocaine do not induce BDNF and neuroplasticity increase.
They do. Just it depends where in the brain you're looking. They certainly do in areas dopamine and reward and motivation, and you're becoming addicted to them. So,
But are they true increases?
oh yeah,
Because you're familiar with, that's the perception out. Methodologies such as saying the opposite was what I'm saying.
yeah. One of the theories behind the transition from drug use to drug dependence is through neuroplasticity of those motivational circuits.
And how had they established that? Through brain mapping or brain?
Yeah, that a lot of the early work on the whole dopaminergic systems, the BTA and reduced accumbens, and neuroplasticity in that specific circuit seems to drive the transition to drug dependence.
So wouldn't the argument be that they stimulate those parts of the brain before bring about any climate change?
They do make a permanent change.
For the better.
Yeah, but they make a permanent change.
Yeah, I know, but we're talking about plant medicine, that has a positive ring to it, right? Because it changed the brain in a positive manner. Cocaine does not change the brain in a positive manner.
Right.
So I'm just saying that's why cocaine is not regarded as plant medicine. I'm just saying.
It's still medicine and it came from a plant.
Sure, but that's not what is meant when we say plant medicine. We mean very specifically. It's a very specific term. It's not a general term.
That's such a very narrow definition.
Yeah,
psychedelic plant medicine, BCM.
Yes. But you just referred to a study. Who was that on psilocybin and SSRIs?
Matthias Vicky. Matthias Vicky.
Okay.
From Sweden.
Sorry.
That's it.
Okay. I've heard that ayahuasca is the exception to this, and ayahuasca and SSRIs do not go well together. And there you can get serotonin syndrome, but the rest are okay. Is that correct?
Yeah, he was looking at LSD and psilocybin in the 2 studies that he did. But yeah, absolutely. Ayahuasca is not safe to combine for SSRIs.
And non-responders and people who have more of a body burden effect from the psychedelics, what do you think is going on there?
Yeah, that's still a massive open question. And something that we're trying to understand is what separates those who respond well to those who don't respond at all. It does seem like there's a small population of people who don't find to psychedelics work out of you.
Also, a concern that's been brought up in the community is that when these new psychedelic compounds get FDA approval, they can push out all the naturals in the clinical realm. So like insurance companies will only cover products for your company, but will not cover the natural compounds.
Well, if psilocybin goes through the same FDA approval process, then it would be eligible for the same insurance reimbursement.
But it's a lot tougher to put a natural compound through that process and get approved.
It's not different than a synthetic compound. It's the same process.
Right.
Yeah. The FDA doesn't care where the psilocybin comes from.
Yes, but okay, so it goes through, but because it's a natural occurring substance, you can't have a monopoly on that.
You can't patent it.
Yeah,
You cannot get composition and matter depend on it. Yes. What you could, however, get is a method of use patent. If you were the first to show that psilocybin has antidepressant effects in the population, then you could write a patent for the use of psilocybin for that treaty. It's not really as strong as composition of matter, but for example, that's what MAPS is going for. Is there a method of use for is a method of use patent for the EMA.
I see. So that will allow anyone to then use it.
Well, that would allow that company exclusivity.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that the natural compound can be used in clinical use at the same level of recognition and approval than these patented compounds.
It goes through the same process it can, but just because we're going through that process, it doesn't mean psilocybin can't.
Can I intermediate psilocybin?
Yeah.
So I think then maybe some of the qualms are around legality, because if it was legal, then you could just have it, right? So you know what I mean? So I guess, do you think synthetics coming through will open the door for quicker legality, which will resolve your questions?
Only in the sense that it will reduce the stigma of psychedelics to allow people to see that they're not as harmful as they were led to believe, which will hopefully allow for rescheduling. But just because one synthetic or natural psychedelic makes it through FDA approval doesn't necessarily make it easier for the rest too.
Well, if it did, then you wouldn't the venture capital companies wouldn't want to put hundreds of millions of dollars into you guys, right? And then they're doing it for a reason, and monetary reason as well.
Right.
So it kind of goes against it, really.
I think there's space for the natural mushrooms that grow, and for anyone to pick them and eat them or grow them themselves. He doesn't legalize things.
Yeah, but not in a therapeutic context that I'm talking about. In the clinical setting, that's where you guys are going to win, and the natural is going to lose.
I think we're going to win because we have a compound that's better fit for the medical system.
But I'm just saying this has been talked about a lot in the community. It's not. I'm just bringing it up. I'm not the one talking about this. It's a concern.
Well, I can. I was gonna. Yeah,
I just wanted to maybe reflect on the fact that plants have been the natural medicine since the beginning of time. I'm a doctor in Oriental medicine and I'm a herbalist, and I worked with raw herbs all day long. And I work alongside with molecular structures that are also from chemical kappa from the pharmaceutical industry. So I think there is space for everybody. And I think the integration of those two medicines is probably where we will have maybe more of a wholesome way of working with all of it. You know what I'm saying? And yeah, the pharmaceutical industry will make millions of dollars and the herbal medicine won't. But it's always been like that. So, yeah. But I don't think one is threatening the other. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Psychedelic medicine, plant medicines are currently illegal in the U.S. and it's not like they're going to become more legal if we get synthetic across the finish line.
Right, and people still consume them. Yeah. The legality is kind of like, you know, I think it's a personal choice, and it's a personal.
I'm talking about clinical stuff. Getting in your Medicare to cover your insurance.
Well, in Chinese medicine in China, they have tons of study that have been published that nobody wants to translate here, but they are readily available for you to look into. And you can see that natural compounds are actually very, very good for depression. They're very good for actually the good function of the liver in relationship to the kidney. And so it's already published. It's just like we in the West have not looked at it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Stephen. Oh.
Different question. I was curious if you could say just a bit more about the role of psychotherapy preceding and following therapy. I think you mentioned that during the trial there is no active intervention, but what was built into the trial and what do you see the role being?
Well, really, we're just using supportive therapy, so it's meant to be incredibly minimal interaction. Where I can't even tell you what the details of it are, but it's not anything that we would recognize as therapy. Really, just making sure the person knows what they're getting into, they know that they're in a safe, supported environment, and that someone is there if they need them. It's not really therapy.
Do you have questionnaires? Do you have questionnaires before and after?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Hundreds.
If someone is misdiagnosed with depression to receive treatment but has something like a mood disorder, for example, how are you sure that they will not go into an episode?
Right. You think do something like bipolar disorder?
Bipolar, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, anything besides depression. But normally depression branches out from another mental disorder, which is not understood by many psychiatrists that are accepted by insurances like Sencal.
Yeah, and right now we do have a psychotic disorder as a speedrun type period as a temporal tribals. So that is something that we want to avoid. That is a risk. But once these compounds are FDA approved, when we make it out to the real world, it is likely that there will be people who are misdiagnosed with depression. You may have some early onset psychosis that wasn't picked up on that could then be launched into an episode. And that is absolutely one of the risks of these medicines. Or once I was having a conversation with Rick Doblin at MAPS, and one of the things it said to me that really made an impression was that once you get over the finish line, psychedelics will hurt people. It's going to happen. All drugs do. Any treatment does. Any surgery has risks. And we have to just be as proactive as we can to understand what those risks are, use most activists, and how can best protect against that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Morgan. Thank you for all of this very interesting information and insight. So I have a couple of questions, but first I just want to go back to your discussion about like once it is approved and everything, like how will people know if they should be prescribed to be like SSRIs or psilocybin. But I just wanted to from a personal experience, so I think that the main reason why I would want to, because I currently take SSRIs and I have been for like maybe 8 years. So I think the main reason for me why I would want to, switch to this option is because in like the one or two times that I have actually been able to, feel what I'm taking from the psilocybin, I think that it's much more of a long-term, like somewhat permanent, effect versus SSRIs. I will have to take for the rest of my life until I, unless I decide to go off of them, which, will then arise with all the other questions like, okay, well, what do I do now to like stabilize it myself and whatever it might be. So I think that, this is offering a more long-term, like permanent effect on people who read it. And, so I myself am definitely looking forward to being able to switch over. So that goes to my next point or question, I guess, my question. When you do start your clinical trials, if you need volunteers, can I volunteer?
Yeah. Currently, we are not doing any clinical trials in the US.
So when
in the near future.
Okay. Do you think that you will be doing, or is it going to take place probably not in the US?
So far, we ran everything in the UK or Netherlands, but in the near future, we will be doing trials in the US.
Okay, well, I will follow that. Thank you.
Just to address your question, you can always check clinicaltrials.gov, which has a listing of nearly all clinical trials for all kinds of things in the U.S. So you can just put in psilocybin or, look for the sponsor of Gilgamesh or whatever, and you'll see who it comes up that says what trials have been conducted. Are they recruiting? Are they just starting? Or are they completing or whatever? So clinical trials, one word, .gov.
Even here, if you do chat GPT, it will tell you what institutions are doing psilocybin or ketamine and also custody.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, last question.
And then we'll get that.
Do your compounds increase BDNF and GDNF? And are you thinking of any indication for longevity? Because I noticed that psilocybin increases the lifespan of the cells.
Yeah, there was that, I'm assuming you're referencing that paper that came out about a week or two ago showing that psilocybin increases longevity in these cell models. It's not something that we are looking at the moment, but it's certainly something that we would be interested in pursuing once there's more research on it. On the neuroplasticity angle, I don't know if it would be in FEGF specifically, but we have definitely done a number of neuroplasticity assays that found increases of other markers like the acetylation state of alpha-tubulin, as well as SV2A and what's the other one? There's another marker neuroplasticity done playing on right now that you saw elevations.
So it could be a dementia, Alzheimer's there, Ray.
I really think that is one of the directions that the field should move in after mental health, is looking at some brain disorders, something like mild cognitive impairment in older adults, or even CTE, brain injury type disorders. But there was a lot of potential there.
Thank you. Good work.
Good deal.
Thank you, audience, for sharing your questions. Some of you know what's coming next. I have some rapid fire questions that I ask every guest. My invitation is just to share the first thing that comes up for you. It's just a sort of fun way for us to get to know you more personally. So my first question for you is, if you were stranded on an island and only were able to have one book with you, what would you be reading?
That is a tough question, but wow. That should be nice.
Similar question. If you were to have one album to listen to on this island, what would you be listening to?
So they don't even listen to albums anymore. Dark Side of the
I feel like we've gotten that answer a couple times. So, yeah.
Should play a cohesive album is like where everything out of it is good.
Yeah. It's a whole journey.
Yeah.
My next question for you, and I feel excited to ask you this one, is do you think the human experience on Earth is a simulation?
Yep.
Okay. And how do you define simulation?
The simulation is a facsimile of something that exists within some other lower dimensional space, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I feel like it's important to know because you get yeses and nos, but I want to hear like what we're saying. Yes and no too.
Would we know if it worked?
Great additional question. Yeah. And based off of your personal and I guess professional experience with psychedelics, do you believe in an afterlife? And do you think that the psychedelic experience gives us a glimpse or access to that?
I don't know if I believe in an afterlife, but I will say that for typically intense experience with DMT, probably from an atheist to an agnostic.
Fun. And if you were to explore any psychedelic compound, plant medicine of your choice, or multiple, with people of your choice, dead or alive, who would be there and what medicine would you be taking?
Billy ticket UCB with Sasha Chilligan. For sure. That's LSD with Hoffman would be great as well. And if I also want to trip with Carl Sagan.
And what?
Well, I'll say mescaline just now, leave it out.
Oh. And is there a psychedelic or molecule that you have wanted to try but haven't yet? And what is it, if so?
Yeah, we'll say Ariel Bay, which is one of the rare psychedelics developed by Sasha Shulgin again, that actually he was started taking through clinical trials back in the 70s as he was for depression actually, but it was a non-hallucinogenic type compound where it seems to produce some features of the psychedelic in space, but without being a full-blown psychedelic. Just be very curious in what that feels like, especially because that is an area where my company is working on non-hallucinogenic during avidness.
Never heard of that before. Is there a psychedelic story you want to share about a journey you've had?
Oh, yeah, it's the DMT trip where brought me from atheist to agnostic was a particularly intense experience where I had taken DMT on the tail end of Candy Flab, which is Ilski and MDMA, and just absolutely went to another dimension where I felt the presence of two beings, and I knew that they were behind me. I could see them, even though they're behind me, and just felt this presence from them where they're reaching out, as if to say, "Oh, you've arrived. Welcome. We've been expecting you. Look, we have so much to show you. We're so happy you're here." And just it's that feeling of the presence that existed in that space with me, and their really elation that they could show off their world. But yeah, life-changing experience.
I actually know a few. Yeah. Have you had a book come to mind?
Yeah, I'll say Kikal and Tikal.
Yeah.
Because if I'm stuck on a desert island, had a book, and well, maybe I'll be able to make something for a living.
And my final question for you, to the best of your ability to be succinct, how do you describe the nature of consciousness?
Consciousness is the universe experiencing itself. It is just each individual little bit of complexity that's somehow gotten together to be able to interact in this, whatever we call objective reality.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your process and yourself with us tonight.
And thank you so much for having me. Well, true pleasure to come and put your experience to District216.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you, audience, for staying with us tonight.